Hey everyone. Thanks so much for watching this episode in my motivational YouTube series called How to Fly with a Clipped Wing. I'm Philip, and in my last video I ended with the decision to amputate my arm. Now in this video I'll pick up from where I left off and talk about some of the life lessons that I've been learning along the way, beginning with the amputation and then moving forward with my life after that point. And I'll also talk about some of the challenges that I've experienced while learning to play soccer and that I've experienced in my flight training. The decision to amputate my arm was one of the best decisions that I could have made for myself ever. And I'd like to take a second to talk about my mentality going through this though, because as I've said before many different times on my website or on the series, mentality is everything. And I've been asked before, even by my own mom and others also, did I ever regret my decision to amputate, or have I regretted my decision at any point since? I've also been asked, what if you find out later that there were things that you could have done to help you? Or do you ever think about if you should have had more surgeries to keep trying? All of those questions have the same answer: no way. There was zero doubt in my mind then and ever since that the decision to get rid of my arm was the best decision for my quality of life. It was more than just getting rid of my arm, because my arm wasn't just in the way. It was my new way of life after my spinal cord injury. Every time I got up to do something, I had to tend to my arm sling and adjust it. Every few steps that I took, I would need to pop my dislocated shoulder back in. Every single night, I had to set up a barricade of pillows around my arm in order to try and keep it still so that it wouldn't twist and dislocate in the middle of the night, because I want to turn in my sleep. My arm represented all the anger, the impatience, the resignation that came from constantly dealing with the aches and the pains of the dead arm itself. It was the arthritis and the locked joints that I would never reverse. It was a parasite latched onto my body, leaching the nutrients and the energy out of me every agonizing second that ticked by in the day. So the decision to amputate was the decision to let all of that go and to begin a new life for myself, a new way of thinking, a new way of living. And it's something that we can all learn from, I think, and that is what it means to truly let something go that not only is out of your control, but seriously holding you back. To let go of our burdens out of fear of what might be or what might not be, or fear of not knowing one way or the other. Because the fact is that our burdens wear us down. Just like my arm wore me down, our burdens eat away at us. They drain us of our energy and of our abilities to be the people who we know we can be and should be, happy and successful and secure with ourselves and loving people, fulfilled, actualized. So please learn from me and decide to, in a way, amputate your own burdens in your own life. Cut them away. People who are negative, who are judgmental, people who can't get out of their own heads, to just be decent, thoughtful, engaging people. People around you that might hold grudges or who might irrationally hold on to the past. People who make you feel unsupported or unloved or unwanted. Decide to cut those people out of your life, because there are people out there that will love you and will support you. It'll be worth it because of how you will grow by choosing to live a different life where those people and those fears and other unhealthy ways of thinking aren't in the driver's seat anymore. You are. And that's what I did at that time, and I'm still trying to be consistently mindful of that in other aspects of my life. Sometimes it's easier than other times, or sometimes it's more obvious when to do this than at other times. But it all started for me with a decision, and that's true for you too. That no matter what you're going through, change begins when you've made the conscious decision to not put up with it anymore, and to not have your life dedicated to holding up the weight of your burdens. Burdens that, sometimes aren't even ours to hold in the first place. As I was going through the thoughts in my mind that night, I decided to amputate my arm. I realized more and more how much my arm had been running the show, and how it was up to me to stop that. So I did. Now, once I could move around without worrying about my arm being in the way, I knew I wanted to try soccer. My girlfriend has played soccer her whole life, and I remember being drawn to the sport for years. I wanted to try it after high school, actually, but once I paralyzed my arm in my senior year of high school, that was pretty much it for me in terms of playing physical sports. I couldn't risk doing the physical sports that I loved to do because my arm could have gotten really thrashed very easily. It was important to not damage the doctor's repair work. But once the arm was gone, I knew that this was one of the first things I wanted to try to learn to do, especially because my girlfriend played and I loved the idea of being able to play with her and even teaching her a few things maybe in the future. In the beginning, training with my friend was a great start, and I remember there being challenges to work through even from the very beginning. Balance was a huge thing to consider since I didn't have my left arm that would normally help me balance myself when I was dribbling or passing, or especially when I was shooting. But we would work together twice a week for about an hour each session to get me comfortable with moving with the ball. Now, normally in soccer, you use your arms not only for balance, but also for things like shielding or protecting the ball with your body from other players, or to prevent a player from coming in hard to attack the ball. So a lot of the practice that I did with my buddy and by myself had to do with thinking ahead in order to make sure that how I controlled the ball would result in an aggressor being on my right side where I could safely protect it. And as my training progressed, I started training even harder with another friend of mine who is still a really fantastic player, a guy who I went to high school with actually, and who I super respect. He really helped me not only raise my skill level, but he got me really motivated and showed me that I could succeed in soccer and play aggressively and intelligently despite not playing before and despite having only one arm. Learning to play soccer was a really beautiful thing because this was the first time I was able to exert myself physically and mentally. And for this reason, soccer played a huge role in my new sense of identity after everything that I had gone through over the years and not having the energy to do the physical things that I love to do. I could go out there and I could pour my heart, soul, and sweat into training with my friends after work, or training by myself with a ball around the house, meeting new people who also played in pickup games, and learning a different way of experiencing what it meant to get right up after falling down. Because with no arm to brace yourself, you do tend to fall a bit harder, but you've got to get back up all the same. The more I played since then, the more I realized how good I still have it, actually. In fact, in one of the leagues I play in, there's a guy who has both arms, but they are both underdeveloped. Yet he's still out there handling business. Pretty incredible. Now, after I graduated college, I was hired as, and moving into the flight portion now, out of college I was hired as a finance analyst later that year. So after I established some reliable income doing that, I began my flight training. Before tackling this childhood dream of mine to become a pilot, I called up my uncle to talk to him and see if he thought it was even possible. And I knew that the power of the mind had gotten me through a lot up until that point, but flying an airplane is serious business. I called him up because he was the uncle who inspired me to be a pilot at all when I was much younger, 7 or 8 years old. And he believed in me right from the beginning, not only from the standpoint of someone who I already looked up to, but as someone who's been a pilot for a long time and who's been through the process already. He let me know that there were going to be a few extra hoops to jump through with the FAA, sure, but other than that, it was entirely possible. So once I officially started, I found there to be challenges right away from the beginning that I needed to adapt to as quickly as possible. So first I'll briefly talk about the challenge of learning to use my prosthetic arm, and then second I'll talk about my challenging final exam. So in an airplane, there are controls in front of you, similar to a steering wheel in your car, and this is how you bank the plane into a turn and how you climb or descend. Then there are pedals on the floor for your feet, and these pedals control what direction the nose is pointing. So when I was first learning to use these controls, my feet were good to go, but I had to figure out how to use these controls that were right in front of me. The prosthetic arm that I had gotten from the prosthetist wasn't something I really used in regular life, but I found a lot of good uses for it during my flight training in trying to hold these controls steady. At first, the prosthetic arm was just a hand attached to the arm. Nothing about it moved on its own, so I had to pre-position the arm and the fingers and everything. But when I was up in the air and tried using the arm to turn and leaning my body to do so, the hand would sometimes slip off of the controls, and I would need to quickly grab a hold of them using my other hand instead of, tending to the other things that my right hand would normally be doing, like working on the radios or managing the power, things like that. This wasn't good at all, no matter what altitude you're at, right? You want to be in control of this aircraft. So I worked with my instructor to design a glove with a sticky surface on the palm and with Velcro straps that were sewn on the hand itself. And these straps were able to be wrapped around the controls and could then ensure that the hand stayed on. So that was pretty comforting. As I became more and more proficient, I noticed that it was really interesting to work through these things by staying open-minded, by staying patient with myself, and by persevering even when things got really tough at times. The same thing with the soccer though. There are lots of pilots out there who are even more limited than I am and still handling it, which means you and I really don't have any excuses at all. There's a woman out there who got her pilot's license and she has no arms. She uses her feet for everything. I've watched her on YouTube buckling herself in and everything. It's intense. It's super incredible. In fact, there's a flight school in Indiana that's specifically for disabled pilots. There were lots of interesting challenges along the way that I think I'll save for future videos when I can really focus on a particular thing that I learned that you can incorporate into your own life. But for now, I'd like to jump ahead to my final exam because that was really, really fun. And I mean, I was expecting it to be fun, but not to the degree that it was. So when you're going through flight training, regardless of whether you're trying to get a basic license or you're trying to get a license to be a certified flight instructor, the main goal of it all is to pass a final exam called a check ride. So eventually my day came and I was set to take my check ride. Now this exam is made up of two parts. It's made up of an oral portion where you're pretty much sitting across the desk from an examiner and talking about different knowledge-based things. Then there's what's called a practical portion where you go up in the plane with the examiner and you demonstrate your ability to do certain things that you're required to be able to do for the particular license that you're going for. Now, my examiner, from the day that I met him, right away, he was loving my tenacity learning to fly despite the amputation. But it turns out that this examiner of mine was a seriously hardened dude after flying helicopters in Vietnam. And one other crazy thing about this guy is that he was the main designer of all of the complicated airspace that houses the Los Angeles basin. So this is the guy who I'm sitting across the table from. Intimidating to say the least, even though he had a great sense of humor. Dry humor, but still joking at times during the oral nonetheless. The back and forth between us about the knowledge topics became so fluid that he actually offered me a job as a ground instructor there. And that to me, for me at that time, felt just so great because I'm sitting there like wanting to grab him by the collar with excitement like, hell yeah, sir. But I have to sit there and be like, wow, sir, thank you so very much. Wow, And after we finished the oral portion and we're walking out to the plane for the practical portion, I took a second to really reflect on all the hours and hours and hours of practice in the plane that I had put in the simulator, in the homework, in the classroom. And I realized the power of not only preparation, but of adaptability. Now, that adaptability, that ability to change my mindset away from, God, I don't know if I could do this, right? I'm afraid, I'm nervous, I'm overwhelmed. Away from that to, I know I can do this. It's just a question of what do I need to do to get it done. That adaptability would prove to be super helpful though, soon enough, because what I didn't realize was that he was going to have me take off my prosthetic arm and actually have me fly without it. To me, it wasn't nerve-wracking or unsettling. It was actually so honorable to me that he demonstrate that sense of seeing potential in me, really wanting to see my performance when it gets way real up there if I can't use my prosthetic arm for some reason. Now, thankfully, whenever I practice flying at home on my computer, I never use my prosthetic arm. I did this for hours and hours, like easily 100 hours flying, doing turns, takeoffs and landings, emergency procedures without the arm. And that way, I'd at least have a fighting chance should the prosthesis ever break in the middle of a flight and I'm unable to repair it, which actually did happen before, by the way, which I mentioned in a previous video. So, point is that when he asked me to remove the prosthetic arm, I was shocked, but I knew I could do whatever he asked me to do. I performed a few challenging maneuvers, not only without the arm, but I executed them still within the required airspeed and altitude conditions for the license that I was going for. He even had me land without the arm. It was a fantastic time, and I really learned a lot about myself that day, that no matter what, if you're willing to change and to do what's right, even though it may feel uncomfortable, and you really do get what you give. And I've since taken him up on his job offer and got my advanced ground instructor certification, which lets me legally teach lectures on aeronautical knowledge to student pilots. Now, one thing that this check ride ignited within me was a sense of confidence to go forward with learning to fly aerobatics. In other words, competitive flying. What aerobatics is all about is performing advanced flight maneuvers such as the loop, the spin, the Cuban 8, or the barrel roll, to name a few, with precise airspeed, altitude, and orientation. The setup inside the cockpit of most aerobatic planes is different than the setup in normal planes that I used in my training. Instead of a steering wheel type of control in front of you, you've got a stick that's down in front in these aerobatic planes. Nowhere to really attach a prosthetic arm to. So I had to learn to fly without the prosthetic arm altogether. I often think back to that previous experience on my first check ride, having a wonderful time up there with my examiner, and the confidence that he inspired within me to do those maneuvers without my arm and land without my arm, and how his confidence in me has really pushed me forward and enabled me to approach the challenges of aerobatic flying head on. I think that that's an important point to make about life, though, that it's funny how certain opportunities that we work for can and often do lead to other opportunities that we couldn't have ever even foreseen. And that's why it was important that I never gave up, and that's why it's important that you never give up on working hard for the things that make you you in this world. That's why it was important that I thoroughly practiced and did my homework and committed that mental energy and attention to being present all along the way. Asking questions, researching, always trying to be better than the student pilot that I was the day before. Keeping that healthy perspective on things, persevering, chasing after that passion, being willing to change, making the conscious choice to confront scary or uncomfortable situations with preparation and courage, positively envisioning myself succeeding. And you can incorporate these things into your life too. These things guided me through my decision to amputate, guided me, back into sports, and guided me through my flight training. And they can guide you to do what's right in your life too. See you next time.